I've got this beautiful segmented blank sent to me by my good buddy Steve Brazil quite a while back. I've been wanting to turn this one and I just hadn't found the right kit until now. I'm going to make this to one of Bullseye Turning's beautiful Apollo roller balls. We're going to start by truing the blank on the lathe and then we'll get busy making the pin. I've got the blank trued up and it looks really, really nice. I'm going to go ahead and get it transferred into my pin jaws and then we'll make our measurement and cut the cap from the body blank. I got the blank in the pin jaws and it's running as true as I can get it. I want the arrows pointing down toward the nib, so I'll cut it off somewhere about here. This will be the cap, and then the nib will be, down here, obviously inside the cap. So when you use the pin, the arrows will point toward the nib. I think that's going to look the best. I'll get my measuring tools and we'll measure off 2.5 inches and we'll get that cap section cut from the blank. I've got the blank marked at 2.5 inches, and I've never done this before, but I'm going to try to use a really fine saw and just let the lathe turn at the slowest possible speed and cut this off. I'm doing this because I want the finest kerf possible to have the most of the blank match up between the cap and the body, so it actually seems to be working. Look at that. Not too bad. We got a nice cut. Just a little bit of convex to it, but not enough to hurt anything. And I think what will happen is when we put our pin together, it'll match up quite nicely, and we'll almost have the same length of the arrow. A little bit shorter, but not much. Take a look at that, 2.501. So we are exactly 2.5 inches. Can't get much closer than that. I'm going to start by squaring the face of our body blank. I drilled my blank out, but I'm not going to show that on camera for two reasons. Number one, to save a little bit of time, and number two, because I believe I have an old set of instructions. I recommend with the Apollo and the Artemis pins, anytime you turn one, immediately go to Bullseye's site and download the PDF, the most recent PDF. And here's an example why. Using a 23/64" bit, I was supposed to drill 1 inch into the blank, and when I test fit my nib, I was about that much shy of the shoulder of the nib fitting against the shoulder of the body blank. So I ended up drilling 1.166 inches into the blank to accommodate for this piece right here. The 5/16" bit, I drilled 1.839 inches, which was perfectly fine. There was no issue there. But the 1/4 inch bit, which accommodates the refill, was supposed to drill 2.8 inches, and I ended up having to drill 2.89 inches to get a good fit with that. So it's not a big deal, and I think had I gone to the website and downloaded the latest instructions, everything would have gone much smoother. We're finished with the body blank, so I've chucked up the cap blank, and I need to square the face of the blank before we start drilling any holes. Just going to use my little square. Make sure that there are no gaps. Looks like I've got it nice and square across the face. This is a 3/8 inch bit, and we're drilling 1.960 inches into the blank. I've chucked up a 29/64" bit, and we're going to drill 1.25 inches. When I test fitted the plastic sleeve into the cap, what I found is the 3/8 inch bit is the exact same diameter as the top section of the sleeve. Therefore, I couldn't push it all the way in with fear of not being able to remove it. So what I've done is I've jumped up to the next size bit, which is a 25/64, and I'm going to drill. I laid the cap on here, and I left just a tiny bit protruding past the end, but I'm going to drill 1.80 inches into the cap to accommodate for the top part of the sleeve. When we perform our test fit, we need to be able to insert this black sleeve all the way into the cap, and we also need to be able to take up the little brass ferrule here. It needs to be able to fit inside of the cap as well so that we get a nice fit between the cap and the body. So I'm going to push it in, and that's going to be perfect. Take a look at that. We're going to get a great fit between our cap and our body. Here's a quick peek at my blank after glue up. It's ready to go to turning. Now, I know it looks like there's a big gap there, but that's not a gap. That's actually my pencil mark where I made a pencil mark around the blank and cut it. I have a very fine kerf because of the saw that I used. Now, you'll see a line here and you'll see a line here. And what I did is, let me back that up just a hair so that they're lined up. There we go. I should have made these before I cut the cap off of the blank, but I didn't, so I lined the blank up and found how it fit perfectly together, and I made those as registration marks. So then, when it was time to glue the blank up, I took a matchstick, mixed up my epoxy, and then I smeared some epoxy around the inside of the blank. I slid this piece in, and I checked the inside. This nib comes off. Checked the inside with a flashlight, looking to see if there was any epoxy that got scraped off the walls of the blank and would have formed a blockage at the back end of this fitting. Luckily, there was not. Next up came the cap. Now, the cap was a bit trickier because I put the epoxy around the inside and I slid this little plastic sleeve in. And the issue is air gets trapped behind it because the hole is so tight, and the epoxy, of course, is sealing any air gaps. So it wants to slide back out, okay? That's where the marks come in. You can't just glue this in and lay it aside. Now, since it's wood, the air will eventually escape through the grain and the pores in the wood. But what I did is I put the blank back together after I glued everything up. I lined my marks, and you can see they were a tiny bit off because I did them by holding the blank, but it let me know which side was which, and I aligned the walnut sections of the blank so that I have a perfect setup on the blank. It looks amazing. Now, at that point, I put a clamp on the blank and gave it enough pressure to hold it together to allow the air to seep out through the wood, the grains in the wood, and to keep the cap insert from pushing out of the cap. Now I've got a perfect pin that is ready for turning. I brought the body blank over to the lathe. I've got it chucked up. It's ready to turn. We're just going to take our time and go really slow, because if you look at it, you can see we have grain running this way, grain running this way. We want to make sure we don't do any damage to the segmented areas of the pin. I just finished sanding. The blank looks and feels amazing. You will see some white areas in the walnut. That is dust, very fine sanding dust. And what we're going to do right now is use a little bit of denatured alcohol, and we're going to clean that out. Gonna let this air dry for a few minutes, let all that denatured alcohol flash off, and we'll start applying our CA finish. I'm gonna use an acetate brush just to knock any dust from the paper towel off the blank. We don't want to touch it with our fingers, and the main reason why is we don't want to transfer any oil from our skin onto the blank. And I'm gonna clean down here in the threads as well. And the reason why is, as this is spinning, I don't want any of that dust to work its way back out here onto the blank. And I actually see some in the collet chuck, so we're gonna brush that out of there as well. It's a good idea to get rid of as much dust as you can before you start finishing, because any of that dust gets stirred up, it goes right back into your finish. That's gonna be beautiful. Quite a few more coats to go. I'm gonna shut the camera off, and we're gonna continue to apply coats. I'll put about 5 to 6 coats of thin, and then we'll put medium until we can't see. It's hard to see in the camera, but when you look at the walnut has some little voids in it from the grain. You don't see that in the maple. So we're gonna fill until those are flat. There's no divots in the blank. So it may take 5 to 6 coats. It may take 8 to 12 coats. We'll just continue to add until that all disappears. And then we'll micro mesh and get her cleaned up, and she ought to look pretty darn nice. I just finished the micro meshing, and we've got a really nice shine on the blank, but I can actually see some divots in the walnut areas, and I can better see the divot down the centerpiece. Not very deep, but deep enough to where we need to do something about it. So I'm gonna go ahead and apply a few more coats of medium CA. First, I am gonna clean this again with denatured alcohol, because I can see some little white spots in there, and I think that's from the slurry as I micro meshed. So we wanna get rid of that so it's not captured under our CA finish. I applied several more coats of CA, micro meshed, Found a few more little dimples, so I did it a second time. Put a number of additional coats on, and now I don't see any grain divots through the CA finish. It is like a sheet of glass from end to end. It's been polished beautifully, and I'm absolutely happy with it. What I'm going to do now, normally I would wax this, but I need to get rid of the dimple where the live center is, so I'm going to go ahead and part off about 1/8 of an inch at the end of the blank. Then we'll sand and finish this end of the blank. That's pretty good. We're going to stop right there. I do have a little dimple on the end of the blank, but that will sand away very quickly with the sandpaper. The little nub is gone off the end of the blank, and we luckily took away enough material where there's no dimple there. It's perfectly flat, and I'm very happy about that. I'm toying with the idea of putting a chamfer on it to cut that so it's not such a sharp edge, and I think I will. So I think we'll sand this in flat, and we'll put a 45 chamfer, roughly 45 chamfer, on the end of it to give it just a nice little shape. Oh yeah, I'm happy with that. Let's run through the rest of the sandpaper, and then I'll come back and put a CA finish on that, and we'll get it polished up. The end of the pin looks fantastic. I'm going to clean it up with a little denatured alcohol. I'll just wipe the whole pin down to get any dust off of it. And we'll let that dry for a few minutes, and we'll go ahead and apply some CA. I'll come back and show you this blank once I'm finished with CA on the end of the blank. The blank really turned out nice. I'm very happy with it. I'm going to go ahead and put a little Renaissance wax on it. We're going to let that wax sort of haze up, and then I'm going to buff it off with a buffing wheel. And my body blank, with the exception of inserting the refill, will be complete. Take a look at that. Isn't that beautiful? Hope the camera's doing it justice. One of the things I mentioned earlier that I was concerned about is if I got CA over the edge of the pin, I wouldn't get a tight fit. And if you look around the cap, you can see that I've maintained a very tight fit. Now you'll notice that these pins, this is the older style. The newer ones have multi-start threads. The older style has single start, and it's just one that I had around. So when I put the body into the cap, it doesn't line up. As I turn the cap down, I should get my alignment back. That's because of the diameter of the blank. Using my calipers, I measured my pin body, and it is 14 millimeters in diameter. This cap blank is 18 millimeters currently. I'm going to turn it down to 16. We're going to see how it looks by fitting it on the pin body. If everything looks well, we'll go with 16 millimeters. If it still looks a little too thick, we'll turn it down to say 15.5, and we'll test again until we get a nice aesthetic with from the cap to the body. I just finished putting CA on the cap blank. We're going to treat it just like we did the body. I'm going to micro mesh it, and then I'm going to come back and look for low spots in the CA, and we'll continue to apply CA until we get everything nice and level. Get the end of the pin cleaned up. It's all sanded. Put a little chamfer on there, and I'm going to go ahead now, clean it with some denatured alcohol, and we'll put a CA finish on it. The cap finished really nicely. I'm going to go ahead and put a little wax on it, and then we're going to buff it up, and we'll start working on aligning it with the body. And when I talk about aligning, what I mean is the cap is a different size than the body, so the little walnut pieces are not going to line up like they did when we initially started with the blank. So we're going to have to do something to make that work. And I'll show you what I do when I get to that point. I wanted to show you guys the pin. It looks amazing. You'll notice it's not aligned properly. What I'm going to do is sand away about half of the first thread, and then we'll test. And it shouldn't take more than one thread, probably more like somewhere between 1/2 and 3/4, and we should get perfect alignment. And the reason why it was perfectly aligned when we started, but it is not now, is because the cap is larger than the body. I made the diameter larger, and had I turned it down to the same diameter, this would have lined up perfectly. But I didn't want a no-seam cap. I wanted a little bit of meat in the cap. When you have a pin and the pattern doesn't line up, the best way to fix it is to remove a little bit of thread. Now, you don't want to put this on like a disc sander because you'll take away too much too fast. So I've just taped a piece of paper here. I think this is around 120 grit, and you can see I've been working with it. And I'm just going to hold it perfectly steady. I'm just going to swirl it around on the paper. I'm gonna get the brass filings out of it, the brass dust really, and then we'll test and we'll see if we can move it. We have moved it closer. When I started earlier, it was on this side of the cap pattern, and now it's moved to where it's just about halfway on the pattern. So we're gonna continue to do this process until everything lines up with our cap and body. It took a few rounds with the sandpaper, but now when we put the cap on, we can snug it right down. It's not loose, got a nice fit and perfect alignment between the cap and the body. I really hope you enjoyed this video. I had a great time turning this blank. It was extremely fun to finally see it become a pin. I'd been waiting on the right kit, and this Apollo was perfect. Now, the Apollo kit I mentioned earlier comes from Bullseye Turning Supply. But Bullseye has some other great stuff. They have the Artemis kit. You've seen me turn a couple of their hobby knives. Love the hobby knives. I use one all the time in the shop. They specialize in hemp blanks. They have dyed wood blanks. They have cast blanks. They have all kinds of great pin turning supplies. And I strongly urge you to head over to their website. I'm going to put this in the comments, but it's www.bullseyeturningsupply.com. And they have given a 15% discount for anyone who uses my code. And my code is RJB15. So at checkout, be sure to enter that code and save 15% on everything in your cart. I'd like to thank you for watching this video. I want you to know that you are always welcome in my shop. Come back and see me again real soon, and be sure to cash in on that discount code over at Bullseye Turning Supply.